Good evening, morning, noon, and night, everybody. My name is John Luke. I'm going to take you on the barbecuing process with me, and we're going to go over some things for all the new smoking people out there that have never really had anything, had the opportunity to smoke their own food, things of that nature. Now, I will say you can absolutely get restaurant quality food out of your own homemade fixin'. So I've got two different types of grills I normally use, and smoker that I use. And one is the old-fashioned offset smoker, which is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best that they make due to the indirect heating method, which we'll go over here in a little while. And then I have another one that I like to use, and this is just the old-fashioned Weber kettle. Just the small kind of grill when you're not really looking to make a whole lot of food. That one's a little bit easier. If you're not going to do a whole lot of meat at once, that's appropriate, you know, for grilling your hamburgers and your steaks and all that. I've actually used it for doing racks of ribs. You can typically use little chunks of wood and things like that. A little bit better, it holds heat a little bit better, things like that. So this is basically the most basic kind of smoker that you can get. I think it's a Brinkmann. And you can see it goes all the way to 700, which we'll absolutely not be using today. And there's the brand. So this is an offset smoker. So before I even light my coals, I'm going to kind of go over what's happening here. So you have your door, and your door is basically where you'll be loading wood. I prefer to load it from here just because the size of wood I'm using. This is your flue. This is how you operate the draft and how much comes through. So basically the way it works is your smoker, it has a hole. I don't know if you can see my fingers in there, but there's a hole. So you'll actually have your fire here. The fire's heat will come up through the side of the vented system here. It'll come, it'll roll, it'll turn, all the smoke and all the heat. Then there's a chimney over here on the side. And I like to keep that baby wide open. The reason being is I operate my fires with my doorway over here. So basically the way it happens is air comes in over here by the door, comes up through the top, rolls around, heats your meat, and then comes out the chimney over there. As we go through this process, I'm going to go over some of the do's and some of the don'ts of what you want to try and fix with barbecue. Today, I'm going to be using a charcoal chimney. What's really ironic is I never use this stuff. Just for the sake of my wood's a little bit damp today, I'm just using this basically as a bed of coals to heat up my wood, and I'm going to be letting this burn completely off before I lay a piece of meat on this smoker. And the reason being is because you can actually taste fluid and things. So I got my charcoal chimney. This is going to properly heat evenly all the charcoals. They'll turn white. I'm also going to be putting in the back, putting a small bed of charcoal back there. And what that's going to do is it's going to leave me a little bit of room here. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to use this area to preheat my wood. And when I'm ready for a piece, I'll basically just have to roll it over on the fire. So it makes it easier for the heating process, because sometimes wood takes a minute. And what you don't want to do in the middle of a cook is have a ton of white smoke coming out of that chimney. You want a clear, thin blue piece of smoke. All right, there's the first light. That fire should get pretty big, and that's okay, because I kind of want this chimney to warm up the bay here, get rid of some of all this moisture drawn in from my old ash and things, kind of dry the pit out real good. We're going to let this burn, and we'll be back for the next step. All right, so here's some of the key components to barbecue. Number one, if you are somebody that likes more of a sweeter barbecue, brown sugar is going to be your best friend. And I will say one thing, brown sugar will burn on a smoker, so you don't want to let that get out of control. The best way to explain that is you want your brown sugar to be not necessarily a powdered donut on top of your piece of meat. You want it to be more sporadic, but patted into the meat. So we have brown sugar. We're going to be using mustard as a binder. We have some garlic and herb here. Need to be careful with this. This is curry powder. Typically you can use paprika, things like that, but curry puts a little bit more distinct flavor in it. I don't have much left, but I get a little bit of black cracked pepper. I have kosher salt, chili powder, and ground mustard. All right, so let's start with the brown sugar. Typically, you want to have a cup and a half or so of brown sugar. That's for a piece of meat. You can kind of see the size of my hand here. This piece of meat is actually 8.3 pounds. So cup and a half of sugar. Like I said, you can't go wrong. If you want to add to the meat later, you can, but that's what we're going by. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball this. I've done it quite a bit, so I don't necessarily need a measuring cup. Alright, so here's brown sugar. I like to bust it up a little bit. Sometimes brown sugar will harden depending on how long it's been in the cabinet. But this will kind of be your base. And typically in all barbecue except a Texas style, this will be your base. Brown sugar gives an awesome flavor on a smoker. We're going to need about roughly 2 tablespoons we have garlic and herb. Just a little bit of curry powder, probably a teaspoon or so. Chili powder is what gives you a mahogany flavor, so we're going to want probably 2.5 tablespoons of that or so. Did I say flavor or color?
Flavor.
Okay. Mahogany color. And that's also like a secret ingredient. Paprika and chili powder. This is ground mustard. About a tablespoon of ground mustard or so. Alright. This is, in my opinion, salt and pepper are the primary flavors. So we got about a tablespoon there. Do 2 tablespoons and that'll give a pretty even sweet salty ratio. Alright, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of black pepper in there, and that's okay. Alright, I think she's done for. Which, I'm not a huge pepper fan anyway, so you can make this to your liking. You know, you could even go as far as adding some type of crushed red pepper or anything to make it spicy, whatever you want to do. So that's the basics of the rub. Now I'm just going to take and mix this up. Okay, so if you take a good look there, the camera focus, you can see chunks of the salt. So it looks like it's pretty evenly distributed. Also note, this isn't probably going to be anywhere close to a competition rub. That's not what I specialize in. This is a family home barbecue cookout kind of thing. And you know, the sky's the limit with this. You can inject, you can do all kinds of different things with meat, but for the most part this is pretty basic. You know, you go to Kroger, you can get multiple cooks out of just these size of containers. You know, this isn't something that's going to be a one and done. So the whole theory of, you know, it costs a lot of money to smoke and to do things with all your meats, it's kind of a myth in a lot of ways, unless you go really extreme and you buy expensive stuff. You know, I'm talking like prime cuts. But this is just a Kroger piece of hog here. And this does really well. If you take your time with it, low and slow, it does really well. So there you can see price with card, we save almost $5 on this. And we got $12 spent. So also, I was going to smoke the pork loin, but unfortunately my fridge just turned up too high and this is solid as a rock. So I'm going to put this back in the fridge and we're going to smoke this another day.
And we got this at Costco.
Yeah, this is a Costco piece of meat. Swift Premium. Costco does have really good pieces of meat. And of course it is in bulk. You can see, like, compared to the size of my hand, how big this thing is. Alright, so typically what I do is make sure your hands are clean, of course. I've already pre-washed my hands, I'm just getting gunk off of them. You can pull your piece of meat out. Come on, little Joe.
Ozzy and Joe.
There we go, I don't know. Could be a Kim, could be Terry, I have no idea. I'm just going to run this underwater. Just kind of get the debris off of it. Alright. Let it drip dry for a second. That is a honking piece of meat. Look at this. Look at all the fatty marble through there. That is great. It's a good sign, because what's going to happen is that fat's going to render, and this is where all the flavor is going to come through. There's the bone. So the bone, you see how the meat separates? These are all the different pieces of muscle through here. This is going to be great. Alright, so typically what you want to do is you want to go through and you want to trim things. This piece of meat actually, right out of the package, is not that bad. Typically, like a brisket or something, will have super hard fat. This piece of meat is not all that bad. And I kind of looked at it when I bought the piece of meat, like, none of this is really terrible. I think all of this will render. And I'm going to be doing this fat side up. So all this white here is going to be fat side up, so that I guess gravity will do its job and all the flavor will seep through the meat. So that's the plan there. I'm just going to put a pretty healthy coat on here. So come across. The idea is to put enough on there to where you just barely starting to miss the meat. You can see the yellow starting to dissipate. Alright, so after I get my first coat on, first thing I like to do is I like to do a pat. Don't rub, because you'll rub the seasoning off. You'll just take and smack it. You're just kind of patting the rub down in the meat. Now, normally at a family function, I just took about a 13-pound brisket to a family function, and it lasted about 20 minutes. So this dry rub recipe is a pretty good one. And once again, I'm not trying to make it all cakey and make everything look like it's one piece. And the reason being is because you want the smoke to actually get through the spices. Alright, this side looks pretty good. You're going to see some difference in the color of the meat. You're going to see the rubs start to, if there's a lot of moisture on top of this piece of meat, you'll start to see it puddle up and things, and that's okay. It'll look like your bark of your meat's starting to dissipate. But if you give it long enough in the smoker, if you try to leave it alone, let it just cook, most of the time it'll dry up and it'll actually start to hear a good bark. Alright, so I got a couple pieces of wood in here. My coals finally turned white, so I'm laying wood on. I'm going to get the fire nice and rolling. You can see down there in the bottom, there's a pretty nice little ember going. So, just for example, this is exactly what you do not want to see rolling out of your smoker. This thick, charred, white smoke. And the reason being is, I'm about to pull some science on you. The reason being is, the molecules in burnt wood that's not getting enough air is going to distort your flavor. It's going to be a nasty smoke instead of a clean, pure smoke. So all of this has to go away in order for me to go ahead and put the meat on the grill. So we're going to let this catch for a little while and close this up, heat it to temp, and I'll probably scrub off the grate, and that's what the next plan is. So this will probably be a longer cook. This piece of meat will probably take between 8 and 11 or 12 hours. So whenever you wrap it with aluminum foil, sometimes that'll speed the process up. We can probably go over that a little bit later too. But some are against wrapping it in aluminum foil. Some would rather use a red baker. I think it's a baker's paper. It's a cloth type of butcher's paper wrap that you actually put around your meat and the smoker. It's actually safe to do. And what that does is preserves the bark. And you'll find that over a series of videos and studying these things, a bark is hard to obtain, and you want to save that. You want to be able to use that in your meat because that's where all your rub and all your flavor is. So you want to keep that nice and safe. Keep it dry. Keep a good flavor on your meat. So we'll get this thing rolling, and the next time I'll see you, we'll be putting meat on the grill. It's been about 30 minutes or so. Every cooker, for the most part, different brands and designs are going to cook a little bit differently. I kind of had to amp up the heat a little bit, throw a little bit more wood in mine because mine has a little bit of a smoke leak in it. Once again, like, if you're somebody that's looking to start smoking on a budget, and that's something that you really would love to try, but you're like, man, I really ain't got the money for all those expensive Traegers and things, I actually found this grill on Facebook Marketplace. I gave $35 for it. I also went to Walmart, and I think I had another $6 or $7 in grill paint. So I took and hit it with some paint, you really can't even tell a difference. I mean, it does its job. You just have to kind of figure out, you know, how to keep your temperature and how everything operates. So I'm going to go over here and show you how the fire's looking, how many pieces I have in there, and once again, this is just for this specific smoker. What I have is about 3 years old or so, probably at the end of its lifespan. It's been seasoning outside. It's never been under a roof or anything, so it's actually hickory. I forgot to mention I'm smoking on hickory. I actually got the load of wood for free. So this cook minus the charcoal to get the fire started, you know, I've got roughly $50 in it, and you know, that's if I bought the grill today, and that's if I got the load of wood and spent the gas to go get it and all that stuff. The wood was already split. I found some guy on Facebook just wanting it out of his yard. So, of course, I confirmed the bark, and I looked at the hickory on Google Images to make sure it was all the same pattern and everything. So it is 100% hickory. Everything's good there. So as time progresses, I'll probably maybe look into a Yoder or something like that. I don't know, haven't decided, but we're going to get ready to put this meat on, and I'm going to go ahead and show you the smoke. We got a clear, thin, white, blue smoke here. This is what you want to see. You noticed earlier how smoke was just absolutely rolling out of this smoker here. That was a bad sign. That meant that the fire wasn't getting enough oxygen, and once again my wood was a little bit moist. So you can actually see back here in the back, where's my finger? There it is. There's my fire pit. I haven't had it tarped or anything, so this is probably the worst possible cooking conditions you can make, but I'm going to make the best of it and show you that you can still do it. Here's our firebox. I got about 3 pretty fair pieces in there. It's developed a good heat. Our temperature is holding around 250 to 300. I'm going to try to stay around 200, or 250 I mean, so that's the plan. Also, I do want to mention, I have basically a bread pan is what it is. It's full of apple juice and water. What I want to try to do is, smoke is very dry, so I want to try to keep some form of moisture in the cooking chamber. So that's going to boil, create moisture in the cooking chamber, and that's going to saturate the smoke with water molecules, hopefully, if all goes well. And that's going to penetrate into the meat. So it'll keep it nice and moist instead of drying the meat out like deer jerky, basically. We are right at exactly 2 hours in the cook. It's almost 3 o'clock on the dot, give or take 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and crack the chamber, take a peek, and see what it's looking like. It's hanging about 250, 275. That's good. We found a lull in the fire where it's staying pretty consistent now. So I'll see what it's got. You see the mahogany flavor, or excuse me, the mahogany color starting to come to it. That's great. It's actually a really good piece of meat. Kind of poke it and jiggle it a little bit. It's still nice and jiggly, meaning that actually took some, that's why you don't really want to touch it, but took some flavor with me. But everything is looking like it's starting to check out. 2 hours in, we got a nice color developing. The red tells me that the smoke is starting to penetrate the meat, and we'll probably be wrapping it soon. Also, we've used about half a pan of water and apple juice mixture, so that's good. It means it's been to a boil and it's actually kept moisture in there. Alright, so 2 things need to happen. Number 1, I just took a peek to see where my water level was in my pan. It needs water, and it needs water pretty bad. It's starting to sizzle on the bottom, so I'm going to put some water in there. Also, at this point, the color of the pork butt is starting to get a pretty dark color, so I haven't exactly developed the bark that I wanted, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it so I don't actually burn the outsides. Like we talked about earlier, sugar can burn. So there's a couple spikes of where the fire got just a little bit too hot. Nothing crazy out of control, but if I wrap it, then we can go ahead and know it's safe to preserve the outside of all the rub that we worked hard on. Okay, so before we wrap it, this is what we're looking at. A beautiful, beautiful piece of meat. We've actually developed a incredible bark on there. It's nice and firm. So this is the point that you want it to get to right when you get ready to wrap it. Now remember, this was the fat cap up, so all of this splitting, this is where the fat has rendered and split. So Absolutely beautiful color. So we got a little bit of daylight left. At this point, we're not so much worried about the purity of the smoke because we have foil wrapping it. It's protecting the meat. We're holding right about 200, 250 depending on how everything's fluctuating. Still doing a good cook. Also, I do want to mention, typically you use a probe or a temperature, a thermometer to stick the meat to find out what temperature it's going to be. Now, knowing how thick this meat was, from experience, I don't have any thermometers on the meat right now because I know it was going to take a long period of time in order for the fat to render and break down. So what I'm doing instead, about roughly the 6 hour mark, 5.5, 6 hour mark, I'm going to probe it one time just to see where I'm at temperature wise. Now, it is possible for one side of the meat to be warmer than the other, but another thing to take into consideration is there's got to be a rest time in the meat. So what we're aiming for between 175 and 190. We're probably going to pull it off of the smoker at 180 depending upon tender, and there's going to be about a 10-degree window where the actual meat will gain temperature once you take it off of the smoker. I guess the inside of it, maybe it's the bone that cooks it. It continues cooking it, so you'll have a 10-degree gain after you pull it off of the smoker. So our plan is we're going to pull it at 180, and we're going to let it rest for about 45 minutes to an hour, let all the juices come back to it, because a cooking muscle, a hot muscle, is a tight muscle, meaning it pushes the fluid out of it. So we're going to give it time for the juices to come back to it. And also, I do want to say that this is by far, this is a hobby. This is something that I really enjoy doing, and there's a couple reasons why I like to do it. Number one is probably almost always having the best dish wherever you go. If you're, smoking a brisket, if you're doing ribs, whatever it is, most of the time you kind of have the exotic food. For example, for Thanksgiving, I smoked a turkey and a brisket. Completely untraditional to what it is, but we're creating our own traditions in ways. So keep that in mind. It's always fun to kind of have a little bit of an explorative food where you could try something new and somebody else could try something new. Smoked turkey was amazing, and the reason why is the outer skin of the turkey actually baked, and it created this hard crust on the outside that locked all the juices inside. So it was a super moist turkey when we injected it with apple juice and things like that. So it's really, like I said, the sky's the limit. If you enjoy cooking, or even if you don't enjoy cooking, seeing the end result and tasting is amazing. All right, so it's 6 p.m. We're officially 4 hours into the cook. What we're going to do is we're going to open the lid. I'm going to go ahead and probe the meat just to see ideally where the temperature is on the gauge, so we know how much longer it's going to take. Typically it's 1 pound of meat per hour, and this was an 8-pound pork butt. So let's go ahead and pop that and see what temperature we're sitting at. All right, this is what we're going to be using here. You can see it displays the temperature out. This is actually the temperature outside, but I think I got this from Amazon or Walmart. This was a fairly simple, cheap little thermometer. It also has things like timers and whatnot you can do on it. So let's go ahead and see what we got. You can actually see a bronze color starting to develop on the aluminum foil. Penetrate through the foil and see what we got. So we're sitting at 165. It's probing pretty tender for the most part, so this is a little bit further away from the fire. It's 153, looks like it's declining maybe, so we're staying about 153. 185, so this is actually, the front of this is where it's supposed to be. So what I want to do is I want to turn this around. That way the fire can actually approach the back of it. Alright, so what I'm doing here, I pulled it off the smoker just for a minute, and what I'm trying to do, there's a bone right here you can see protruding. Whenever you can grab that bone and it basically pulls out of the piece of meat, it's done. It's still kind of attached. Even though we're at temperature, I'm going to go ahead and put it back on. We're roughly 6 hours into the cook right now. That's expected, but I wanted to make sure. Also, there was a heaping amount of juices that came off of it, and that's just from keeping it inside of the foil. So I'm gonna wrap this back up, put it back on the smoker for another probably hour or two. All right, so we've had 7 hours of cooking on this, and this is kind of our tester here. You see that the bone is coming off clean. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up. We're going to let it sit for about 45 minutes to an hour or so. And then we're going to take and pull the meat off of it. And we're going to have us some pulled pork. Alright, so this is our final product. And one of the tell-alls is how well the bone comes out. And it seems to be pretty clean for the most part. There's a couple of spots where there's a little bit of fat left over. Well, let's see how well it actually breaks down and pulls. Alright, so as you can see, it's still really hot. It's kind of hard to grab a hold of it. But there is tons of moisture in there. And as far as texture, it's very good texture. Probably could have stood to go just a little bit longer. But you can see the or the actual grain in the meats. That's really good, so that's going to taste amazing. We waited long enough. Let's try some of this pork butt. I'm going after a piece that has bark on it. There we go. You can see that. It's got a good red smoke ring on it. That is going to be amazing. A little bit of barbecue. Oh yeah. That is amazing. There's a lot of flavors there. Like I'm getting some of the rub, getting some of the smoke. There's juice, moisture. Everything's very tender. Especially around the fatty edges. The fatty edges has held so much flavor. This was a great one. That pretty much does it for this episode. So if you like what we're doing, why don't you go down there and click that like button and subscribe so that you can have all kinds of new recipes and videos and things. Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell so whenever I upload a new video, you're the first one to know. Thank you for watching us on Hickory Blues Barbecue. We'll see you next time.